Don't watch this alone. Stay focused. In the 1840s, at the Vienna General Hospital, one of the finest medical institutions in all of Europe, there was a maternity clinic where pregnant women would arrive in tears, begging on their knees not to be admitted. Some would rather give birth in the street outside than be taken through its doors. They weren't being irrational. They had done the math with their own eyes. Women admitted to this particular ward were dying at a horrifying rate, struck down within days of giving birth by a disease that turned childbirth, the beginning of life, into a death sentence. And the most terrible part is that a young doctor working in that hospital figured out exactly why it was happening. He found the cause. He found a solution so simple it cost almost nothing. He proved it worked. And for that, the medical establishment of his time did not reward him. They ruined him. They mocked him, forced him out, watched his mind unravel, and finally locked him inside an asylum, where he died from the very same infection he had spent his entire life trying to defeat. This is Dark Diagnosis Files, and this is the story of Ignaz Semmelweis. To understand what Semmelweis discovered, you first have to understand the disease that haunted every maternity ward in 19th century Europe. Puerperal fever, also called childbed fever. It was, quite simply, one of the great killers of women. A mother could deliver a perfectly healthy baby, feel fine for a day or two, and then be seized by raging fever, agonizing abdominal pain, and a rapid, merciless decline into death. In the worst hospitals and the worst years, it could kill a staggering proportion of the women who passed through. In some wards, as many as 1 in 6 new mothers never went home. What made it especially strange was that women who gave birth at home, or with the help of midwives, rarely died of it. It was, overwhelmingly, a disease of hospitals, a disease of exactly the places that were supposed to offer the best and most advanced medical care available. Ignaz Semmelweis was a Hungarian physician, born in 1818, who took up a position as an assistant in the obstetrics department of the Vienna General Hospital in the mid-1840s. And almost immediately, he was confronted with a puzzle that gnawed at him. The hospital's maternity service was divided into 2 separate clinics. The first clinic was staffed by doctors and medical students. The second clinic was staffed by midwives and midwifery students, and the death rates between these 2 clinics were wildly, impossibly different. In the first clinic, the doctor's clinic, mothers were dying of childbed fever at rates that sometimes reached 3 to 4 times higher than in the midwives' clinic next door. This was not a secret. The women of Vienna knew it. That was why they begged to be sent to the second clinic and wept when they were assigned to the first. They understood, in the plainest possible terms, that being treated by the more educated, more prestigious doctors was somehow far more likely to kill them. Semmelweis was tormented by this. Same building, same air, same patients, assigned essentially at random. What could possibly explain why the doctor's patients died so much more often than the midwives? He worked through the possibilities methodically, ruling them out one by one. Was it overcrowding? Both clinics were crowded. Was it the climate or the ventilation? They shared the same environment. Was it something about the position women gave birth in, or even, as some genuinely suggested at the time, the psychological terror caused by a priest walking through the ward to deliver last rites? He tested these ideas seriously and found none of them held up. Then, in 1847, a personal tragedy handed him the answer. A colleague and close friend of Semmelweis, a professor named Jakob Kolechka, was accidentally cut with a scalpel by a student during an autopsy performed on the body of a woman who had died of childbed fever. Within days, Kolechka himself sickened and died, and when Semmelweis reviewed the findings from his friend's own autopsy, he was stunned. The internal devastation in his friend's body looked identical to what he had seen, over and over, in the bodies of mothers killed by puerperal fever. This was the flash of insight that changed medicine forever. Kolechka had not given birth, but he had been cut with a blade carrying material from a corpse, and he had died of the same thing killing the mothers. Semmelweis realized that some invisible cadaverous material, as he called it, was being transferred from the dead to the living, and it was lethal, and then the full, horrifying picture snapped into focus. The doctors and medical students in the first clinic didn't just deliver babies, they also spent their mornings performing autopsies, dissecting the very corpses of women who had died of childbed fever the day before. Then, without any meaningful cleaning of their hands, they would walk directly from the dissection room to the delivery room and examine living, laboring mothers, The midwives in the second clinic did no such thing. They never handled corpses. That was the difference. The doctors were, quite literally and quite unknowingly, carrying death on their hands from the dead women of the morning to the living women of the afternoon. Semmelweis acted immediately. In May of 1847, he instituted a strict new rule in his clinic. Before examining any patient, every doctor and student had to wash their hands in a solution of chlorinated lime, a harsh disinfectant he chose specifically because it removed the foul smell of the dissecting room from the skin, which he reasoned meant it was removing the deadly material too. The results were not gradual. They were not subtle. They were immediate and overwhelming. The death rate in the first clinic, the doctor's clinic, collapsed. Maternal mortality plummeted from around 16% to below 2% within months. In some later months it dropped to 0. Not a single mother died. For the first time, the doctor's clinic was no longer a place women feared more than death itself. Semmelweis had done it. With no knowledge of germs, no microscope revealing bacteria, no theoretical framework to explain the invisible killer, through pure, relentless observation, he had found a way to save enormous numbers of lives, using nothing more than a basin of disinfectant and the insistence that doctors clean their hands. You would think this would have made him a hero. Instead, it began his destruction. The medical establishment of the era did not embrace Semmelweis's discovery. It resisted it, and in many quarters, it was openly hostile. Part of the problem was scientific. Germ theory did not yet exist. Semmelweis could prove that hand-washing worked, but he could not explain why in terms the science of his day would accept. To many prominent physicians, a claim without an accepted theoretical mechanism looked like superstition, no matter how compelling the numbers were. The dominant belief of the time held that disease was caused by miasma, bad air, foul vapors, not by invisible material carried on a doctor's hands. There was also a professional rigidity working against him. Medicine in that era was built on a strict hierarchy and on centuries of inherited authority. A junior Hungarian obstetrician telling the most eminent professors in Europe that they had been fundamentally wrong, and lethally so, did not fit the way knowledge was expected to flow. Ideas were supposed to descend from the great authorities downward, not rise up from an assistant challenging his superiors. Even physicians who found his data intriguing hesitated to endorse a theory that would have overturned so much of what their entire profession claimed to know. But part of the problem was far more human and far uglier. Semmelweis's discovery carried a devastating, unavoidable accusation buried inside it, that the doctors themselves, respected, educated, well-meaning men, had been the ones carrying death to their patients, that their own unwashed hands had killed the very mothers they were trying to save. Senior physicians were deeply insulted by this implication. The idea that a gentleman doctor's hands could be dirty, could be instruments of death, was an affront to their status and their self-image. And so, rather than accept an unbearable truth, many of them simply rejected the evidence. Some mocked him openly. Some dismissed hand-washing as an insult beneath their dignity. This pattern, the reflexive rejection of new evidence simply because it contradicts established belief and threatens people's comfort, would later be given a name in Semmelweis's honor. It is called the Semmelweis reflex, and it describes exactly what happened to him. A truth rejected not because it was wrong, but because accepting it would have meant admitting a terrible past harm. Semmelweis did not handle the rejection gracefully, and it's fair to acknowledge that. As the years passed and the medical world continued to ignore evidence that was saving lives before their eyes, he grew increasingly bitter, angry, and confrontational. He fired off furious open letters to prominent obstetricians across Europe, at times denouncing them directly as irresponsible murderers, accusing them in effect of killing mothers every time they refused to wash their hands. He was, in many of the specifics, absolutely right, but raging at the most powerful figures in your profession, however justified, is rarely a path to being heard. His outbursts alienated even those who might have been sympathetic. He lost his prestigious position in Vienna and returned to Budapest, where he again introduced hand-washing and again saw death rates fall, and where he again found his ideas largely ignored by the wider medical world. And here is where the story turns from professional tragedy into genuine horror. Through the late 1850s and into the 1860s, Semmelweis's mental and emotional state deteriorated. Years of being disbelieved, mocked, and isolated, while knowing, with absolute certainty, that his rejected discovery could be saving thousands of lives, took a devastating toll on him. His behavior grew erratic. He became, by the accounts of those around him, increasingly unstable, depressed, and difficult. Historians still debate the precise cause. Some have suggested early dementia, others a possible neurological illness, others simply the crushing psychological weight of prolonged rejection. Whatever the cause, by 1865 his family and colleagues had decided he needed to be committed, and the way they did it was an act of quiet betrayal. Under the pretext of visiting a new medical institution, some accounts say he believed he was being taken to see a spa or a clinic. Semmelweis was lured to an asylum in Vienna. When he arrived and realized what was actually happening, that he was being committed, not consulted, he understood the trap and tried to leave. He struggled. He tried to fight his way out. The asylum guards restrained him. He was, by multiple accounts, severely beaten, forced into a straitjacket, and locked in a cell. He never came out. His journey ended there behind those stone walls. In the struggle, or during his confinement, Semmelweis sustained a wound to his hand. He received no proper care for it. The wound became infected, and that infection spread, unchecked, through his body, becoming sepsis, a massive, overwhelming blood infection. Think carefully about what that means. Sepsis is the same fundamental process, an infection raging out of control through the body, that underlies the childbed fever he had spent his entire career fighting. The man who discovered how to stop deadly infection from spreading through unwashed contact died, alone and disbelieved, of exactly that kind of infection, contracted inside the walls of an asylum his own colleagues had put him in. 14 days after being committed, on the 13th of August, 1865, Ignaz Semmelweis was dead. He was 47 years old. His discovery was still, at the moment of his death, largely rejected by the profession he had tried so hard to save. Vindication came, as it so often does, far too late to help him. Within just a few years of his death, the work of Louis Pasteur established germ theory, finally providing the scientific explanation for why Semmelweis's handwashing had worked all along. There really were invisible living things capable of carrying disease from one body to another. Joseph Lister, building on Pasteur's work, pioneered antiseptic surgery and dramatically reduced deaths from infection. The very thing Semmelweis had been mocked and destroyed for insisting upon became, within a generation, one of the absolute foundations of all modern medicine. Today, hand hygiene is understood as perhaps the single most important measure for preventing the spread of infection in any hospital on Earth. Every time a doctor or nurse washes their hands before touching you, they are performing the exact ritual that a broken, dying man in a Vienna asylum insisted upon, and was destroyed for insisting upon, more than a century and a half ago. Semmelweis is remembered now, at last, as a hero of medicine. A university bears his name. Statues honor him. In an age of pandemics, his 3 simple words, wash your hands, have been invoked around the world as life-saving wisdom. But the honors came after the asylum, after the beating, after the sepsis, after a brilliant man died, convinced that the world would never listen. The lesson of Ignaz Semmelweis isn't only that hand-washing saves lives, it's that being right is not enough, that institutions and the people who run them can resist an uncomfortable truth so violently that they will destroy the person delivering it, rather than face what it means about themselves. If a story like this stays with you the way it stays with us, please take a moment to subscribe to Dark Diagnosis Files. Every case we investigate is real, documented, and drawn from the historical record. The moments where medicine failed, or fought itself, or arrived at the truth only after terrible cost. Subscribing is what keeps us digging into them. This has been a real, documented case in medical history. Every detail in this video is sourced from confirmed historical records and peer-reviewed medical literature. Dark Diagnosis Files investigates the horror that happens around hospitals and medicine. New cases every Sunday, Tuesday and Friday. Real, documented, told with the gravity they deserve. He saved more lives than almost any doctor of his century, and he died behind locked doors, from the one thing he had spent his whole life trying to wash away.